Hi, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Chrissy Hodges. I just want to commend you for being here. I know that you are looking up videos and you are looking for information to help you understand what you're going through with OCD and intrusive thoughts. Sometimes that can be scary because you don't know what you're going to find. Sometimes you feel like you're finding the right information, but then sometimes you feel like you're finding information that makes you think you don't have OCD. So just so you know, in my videos, some things might resonate with you, some things might not, but everybody's experience with OCD is different. So try not to compare yourself to others, especially when looking for assurance or normalization of your own experience. I am a certified peer support specialist working with people worldwide, providing support in any stage of recovery. I also can do referral consultations to help connect you to therapists all around the world. And I'm the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. NoCD is an app, and they also provide telehealth. They have all kinds of features through their app for you to connect with other people, but especially if you're looking to do ERP through telehealth, they can work in many, many places around the world. So check them out at treatmyocd.com. Okay, let's get to it. Today we're going to talk about a really important concept. This may or may not apply to you, and if it doesn't, that's okay, but it does apply to a lot of people, and we're going to talk about trauma and we're going to talk about grief. Now, if you have worked with an OCD therapist or if you have read things about OCD, you are likely to hear that OCD does not cause trauma. Sure, it doesn't cause trauma for everybody, but the invalidation that we can feel when we hear that, or when someone tells us that our experience was not traumatic, when many of us know that it is, that can really impact our mental health. It can impact our recovery, and in fact, it can cause us to not get the help that we need to process the trauma that we may have experienced with OCD. Let's back up first and talk a little bit about trauma. So I am very much aware of how the term trauma is thrown around in everyday language, and it is detrimental for people who have actually experienced trauma. We know this with mental health terms, right? I mean, people throw mental health terms around all the time. Depressed, I'm so OCD about this, this and this and this. And what it does is it sometimes takes out it desensitizes, I guess, the real experience for people when they actually do experience these mental health challenges. So trauma is no different. And I do know that people are super protective of using the term trauma, especially when it comes to PTSD, because this is a real diagnosis because of trauma. And when people are saying, oh my gosh, I was traumatized the other day when I was walking across the street and I stubbed my toe. Okay, so this is not helping the cause for real disorders that cause people sometimes lifelong distress. So you have to be really careful about how we're using the term trauma. And yes, it's important to be assessed for it. You can get treated for trauma, but just using that term flippantly can really invalidate what people experience when they've had traumatic experiences that continue to distress them in their life moving forward. So with that said, this is why I think that you may hear, or you may have been told when you've gotten therapy, that no, the OCD experience isn't traumatic, you don't have trauma. OCD therapists tend to be focused heavily on the behavioral aspect of it. And I will be honest with you, and this may or may not be accurate, but a lot of therapists who have not experienced OCD really, even though they can treat it and they can treat it well, they don't understand the full experience of living with OCD. As we all know, people just don't get it. They can't get it. They're incapable of understanding what it is like to live with this brain disorder. You know, that's kind of sad, but at the same time, that's why you're here. That's why you're looking for community of people who really get it. I could tell someone I'm having intrusive thoughts today. And they probably think that I have like 3 or 4. That little do they know that every single moment of that day I'm being pounded by intrusive thoughts, and I'm being forced to act around them and around the entire world to pretend like nothing is really going on when I'm deeply suffering inside and suppressing the anxiety that comes along with those intrusive thoughts. So you get it, I get it, but not a lot of people can. And I think that that's what happens when you are working with a therapist that has never had OCD. It may just seem like a behavioral process that we just need to fix and then go on with life and everything will be great. You and I know differently, right? OCD comes with a lot of grief. And grief is different than trauma, so let's just go ahead and make that distinction. But the reflection of the experience that we have with OCD, you can discover that there are times that you may have been traumatized. And after even getting effective treatment, if you aren't addressing that trauma, if you aren't moving forward and maybe getting some sort of therapeutic help or intervention, this can impact your recovery. I know it did for me. I got trauma therapy for childhood stuff, but it also had to do with my OCD experience. So I am going to focus on that as an example for this video. Oh, my dog is driving me. Every time I get up here and do videos, she just has to get my damn lap. Okay, so I first want to, before I kind of dig into my story and how I realized that I had some traumatic incidences with OCD, I first want to acknowledge that a lot of people experience a traumatic reaction once they have gotten through an OCD bout, and the idea that they could go back to that rock bottom. A lot of people experience a great deal of fear, and it could be a trauma response of remembering what it was like to be at the bottom. Now, y'all probably know what I'm talking about. You know, OCD ebbs and flows. Whether you've had treatment or not, it'll come up, it'll be bad for a little bit, and then it kind of goes away, and you think, oh my God, it's never gonna come back. And then it comes back and knocks you on your ass. But when it comes back, or the thought of it coming back, can really trigger for you remembering what it was like to be at the bottom. Now, the bottom is typically what? Absolute hopelessness. You know, you don't know how to get out of this. You don't know if it's ever gonna end. A lot of times people experience suicidal ideation. A lot of times people need to be hospitalized because there just doesn't seem to be an end in sight. And like I said earlier, you're just getting pounded with intrusive thoughts day in and day out, and possibly physical symptoms like the groinal or things like that, where you just think there's no fucking way this is OCD. This has got to be real. When you can't get out of it, when you can't have any sort of relief, you are at rock bottom, right? You're at a rock bottom. And the reflection of that when you are better can really bring on a trauma response. So I want to validate that for you. And this is something that I work with people all the time on. In fact, I meet with people and this is exactly why we're meeting, because they feel so afraid of the relapse, or they're going into a relapse and they're remembering how bad it was. I'm sure y'all know this. When you're out of it, you forget just how awful it can be, just how awful it can feel. And then when you're in it, you think, oh my God, it will never, ever be better, right? So these are two polarized states of mind. And when you have had a bout that is pretty good and you're feeling good, or the intrusive thoughts aren't at the front of your brain, and then you start to feel that slide back, or you are starting to lapse, the fear is real. And it can absolutely bring a trauma response of just total hopelessness of, I don't ever want to be that far down again. Trust me, I experienced this too. I mean, my rock bottom was pretty fucking awful. And I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. Now, so I can't speak for everybody, and I obviously, I've had experiences with OCD that weren't traumatic, and then I have had some that are. So I'm just going to tell you some of the places that you may have experienced trauma, and these are some places that you may want to work with a therapist on to kind of work through that and free some of that stuff up in your body. So the onset, right? For me, that was 8. And really, I do feel like I have a trauma response based on what that happened, because it legit, my whole world changed in 1 second. And I know that you probably know this in your own experience. A lot of people, they were normal, everyday people. I was a normal kid playing Atari, riding bikes, like, outgoing. I was outspoken then too. And boom, like in 1 second, this dude barfed in my class, and all of a sudden my world turned upside down. I mean, upside down. I had a panic attack in class, and the next thing I knew, I was having all these intrusive thoughts about how I was being punished by God, and it turned into this religious scrupulosity. And so I remember, like, it is almost like things are frozen for me in that moment. I remember everything. I remember the smell of the room. I remember exactly what I was wearing. I remember everything about everything in that moment, because everything froze, right? And that was when I knew as an 8-year-old, my life had just changed and things were always going to be different. And that was terrifying. I also knew, don't tell anybody, because it seems really fucked up what was going on. But I knew as an 8-year-old that I didn't have a support system enough to be able to share that information and get the kind of validation that I needed. And so I kept it a secret. So starting then, from that day forward, I never told anyone what was going on, which is also a really big source of grief for me, and something that I did have to work out in trauma therapy. Why is an 8-year-old not able to tell anyone when their entire life has just turned upside down? Well, that's between me and my therapist. Anyway, so the onset of symptoms is absolutely a time when you could have a trauma response that's a source of grief. The content, now you're gonna hear this all the time. The content doesn't matter. Fuck that. It does matter. It doesn't matter when we're doing behavioral therapy, okay? So the mechanism is the same, but the content is so personal. And when the content, especially when it targets people that we love, when it targets harm maybe towards ourselves, when it targets our identity, things that we feel like we could lose, then we absolutely are going to have a grief response to that. And to not validate that is a possibility really does a disservice to people who live with this day in and day out, and again, get pounded with intrusive thoughts every single day, okay? So I want to validate that for you. People are gonna say that all the time, it doesn't matter, blah, blah, blah. Well, whatever, maybe theirs didn't matter, but to a lot of us, it emotionally matters. It is grieve-worthy. And I'm just gonna use POCD as an example, because I always use this one. I wanna make sure that I normalize it for you, because it's so common. I mean, when you are pounded by POCD thoughts, day in and day out, and images and things you don't want to see, things that are so horrible for you to have to experience and you can't stop them, yes, that can be traumatic. Absolutely. Even after effective therapy, having to reflect back on the fact that you had to suffer through that and the idea that that could happen again, yes, this can be a source of trauma. I don't give a shit what anybody says. And I want to validate that for you if that is what you've been through or what you're going through right now. Rock bottom, again, I can't reiterate this more. This is a tough spot to be, right? It's a scary place to be. It's very lonely. It's very isolating. There is a lot of hopelessness. And as we know, when you experience a huge degree of hopelessness and you don't feel like there's a way out, suicidal ideation can come in. Depression can come in. And that is a scary, scary time for most of us. This is probably the most traumatic part of my entire journey. Now, I hit bottom a few times in my teenage years, because remember, and then I had sexual orientation OCD starting at age 14. Other stuff too, like demon possession, like harm OCD, things like that. And the religious scrupulosity was the overarching. So I hit bottom a few times, and I thought that was as far down as I could get. And when I experienced depression and really hit rock bottom when I was 20, and I started to contemplate suicide. Remember, suicidal ideation and suicidal contemplation is very different. A lot of people experience suicidal ideation with OCD, okay? So if you experience that, I just want to let you know that you're not alone and you're not a horrible person for thinking that. Contemplation, making a plan, this is when you need to get help, okay? When you're starting to think about a plan, when you're starting to think that this is a possibility, please reach out for help. I know it's scary and you're scared to tell people your thoughts, but this is the time you need to get professional help, and get somewhere that you can be safe, and figure out how to kind of pull yourself out of this, because sometimes you can't do it by yourself when you get to that point. So go and ask for some help at your local mental health center, at a hospital if needed. Call 911 if you're here in the States. Tell someone that you love that you are in danger, that you are in danger of harming yourself. Get the help that you need and the help you deserve. So when I was at this spot, this was the worst part for me, and I was in it for about 3 to 4 weeks, which I look back again, I can remember everything. It's almost like this frozen memory inside of me, just a terrifying spot. And I do have a massive trauma response to that, my suicide attempt, because I was also hospitalized after that in a locked facility. And this was the first time I told anybody about what was going on in my brain after 12 years. So that whole experience is a huge source of trauma for me. If you want to know more about it, my book details everything about my experience. I don't want to talk about it here on the video, but after treatment, I was lucky. I was able to get treatment. A year later, I was able to do phone therapy with a therapist in New York. And so after treatment, I kind of fell into that trap that I was just talking about earlier of, okay, now you're better, go live life. Well, I was still heavily dealing with the grief. I had not processed the trauma that OCD had caused me. And so the next 10, 12 years were really difficult for me. I was very much invested in the grief process, but I wasn't allowing myself to express that grief, right? I didn't feel like, maybe you can relate to this, I didn't feel like I deserved to grieve. I thought, Chrissy, you got better. You were lucky to get treatment. Like, get over it and move on. You should just be happy. And a lot of times that's what we think, right? If I don't have the intrusive thoughts, life will just be great and it'll be happy. But that's why it's important to understand that this experience with OCD, even the duration of time that you have it, can be traumatic. And if you aren't processing that trauma, if you aren't working on that or through that with a professional, or dealing with the grief around this, the grief could be the loss of who you feel like you were, the loss of who you wanted to be, the time lost, the milestones lost. All of these things are legitimate, devastating parts of living with OCD, and things that you can process and you can come to terms with, and you can grieve to a degree that you can live a happy and productive life. But it is important to understand that your experience in the reflection of your experience can have an impact on you today or in your future recovery. And it is okay to ask for help. And that's what this video is all about. If this is part of what you've been through, it is okay to reach out for support. You do not have to adopt the philosophy of like, I got better and I need to get over it and just live life. If you are hitting walls, this might be why. I can't tell you that it 100% is, but it might be, because there's still stuff inside of you that you need to process. There's still grief that needs to happen. This is where peer support is great. Peer support groups, finding a community of people, processing your experience with others to see that you're not alone. You could read blogs all day. You can watch my videos all day and feel like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only person here. But sometimes not being able to meet someone, talk with them, hear that you are not alone, express your experience, and have someone validate for you, not being able to do that can continue to make you feel isolated and can, at times not give you permission to grieve. Lastly, the way that I got through this, I kind of call it like the emotional recovery of OCD. And this was right before I went to get some trauma therapy, which, by the way, helped tremendously, not only with my own life and the stuff that I deal with trauma, but also in my ability to kind of link that trauma to OCD. Remember, trauma doesn't cause OCD, but there are things in our lives that have exacerbated OCD or have kind of set the OCD in motion. One of the things that helped was working with a peer support specialist, and we were talking about our experience and the grief that we had on the stigma of mental health and living with something like this. And he told me this. He said, gosh, you have a lot of reason to be angry and a lot of reason to be sad. You've been through so much. This was so horrible. And I was like, no, it's not that bad, even though it was. And he went, you know what? I'm just going to give you permission. I'm going to give you permission to grieve. I'm going to give you permission to be angry and sad. And that's all I needed. And his permission allowed me to move through that emotional experience and really dig into the emotional recovery of OCD. So if that's what you need, I'm giving you permission. It is okay to grieve. It is okay to look back, and it is okay to recognize trauma responses, to know that this experience was hard for you and it happened to you and you didn't ask for it and you didn't choose it. Okay? And so if that's the case, then you're not choosing the outcome either. You did the best that you can. You're doing the best that you can to walk with this really difficult, heavy illness. You're doing the best that you can. But it's okay to ask for more. It's okay to get support. You deserve it. And no, don't say I don't deserve it because I'm a horrible person because of my thoughts. No, you deserve the support and the validation because you matter. And so like every person out there with OCD worries they're the only one, or they really don't have OCD, or they're the only horrible person. We all feel this way. And what you really deserve is to be able to meet other people, talk with them, and know that you're not alone and that you don't have to walk through this alone. So with that said, I hope that this video made sense. I do want you to know that not everybody does experience trauma with OCD, so I'm not saying that they do. You don't have to go looking for it, but you may have, and that sometimes can keep you stuck. And it is okay to seek professional help with a trauma specialist, or if you want to talk to someone like me, I can help you process your experience and then decide whether or not you want to move on and get some professional help. So with that, I just want to say Happy New Year to you. I hope that you are doing well, and I look forward to seeing you next week.